In Germany, the threat of being accused or labeled an anti-Semite for criticizing Israel is, in my view, a main point of hindrance to speaking out against the atrocities. And therefore, we need to discuss the definition of anti-Semitism closer. And I couldn't think of a better speaker to discuss this today. Professor Amos Goldberg is the Jonah M. Machover Chair in Holocaust Studies and an associate professor at the Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He was the head of the Institute of Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University in the years 2020 to 2024. Amos Goldberg's research focuses primarily on the cultural history of Jews during the Holocaust and on Holocaust and genocide memories in the global age. He is the co-initiator and co-drafter of the Jerusalem Declaration on Antisemitism, which offers a criticism to the IHRA definition of antisemitism. Today, he will talk about the pathology of the IHRA definition of antisemitism. Amos, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the invitation to speak in this dark time, at this important forum on January 27th, the day when, in 1945, Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet troops, and which was proclaimed by the UN in November 2005 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I will talk about the IHRA definition, and I didn't really know what to focus about, so I did a little bit of many things. And I will divide my talk to three parts. In the first, I will provide some historical background to the definition or to the atmosphere from which it emerged. In the second, I will focus on the definition itself and on some of its fundamental distortion. And in the last part, I will suggest what I see as its deep logic. So we'll start with the historical background very, very briefly. I will begin with the 2000, not the definition, but something I just mentioned, the 2005 UN resolution on the 27th of January is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The resolution was initiated by Israel. This is the part of the resolution. It was initiated by the Israeli Foreign Ministry with a clear aim, as its initiator, Ron Adam, from the Israel UN delegation at the time, explicitly admitted that this is not just an assumption. He said it on various public and private conversation to provide an alternative to the Palestinian narrative that was perceived by Israel as dominating UN institution. The resolution itself has a distinctly universal character. It mentions Jews only once, you can see, and it does not refer to the state of Israel at all. In contrast, the word rights, human rights, appears 9 times, and extensively it refers to the UN Convention of Genocide and the UN Declaration on Human Rights. But still, it was initiated and very powerfully pushed to the UN by the Israeli delegation and the Israeli Foreign Office at that time. Thus, on its face, the declaration does not serve the Zionist narrative that connects the Holocaust to the state of Israel. I would almost say that the opposite is true. It serves the idea of universal human rights and freedoms, of which we've just heard from Christina, on behalf of which Israel is sharply criticized, and that was 2005 already, and it's an important year. However, the Israeli delegation consciously compromised on this formulation to gain unanimous support, which they gained from the assembly members. They knew well that in the end, these small details were less important. What would be established in global consciousness was the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, linked to the tragedy of the Jews and state of Israel, even if this is not explicitly stated. And you can see that the definition of the Holocaust in this resolution is very broad. It's far beyond the Jews, but they understood very well how it's going to function, and they were ultimately quite correct. This move was part of a tectonic shift that occurred in Israeli diplomacy at the turn I can stop sharing now. This move was part of a tectonic shift that occurred in Israeli diplomacy at the turn of the millennium, or at the beginning of the first decade of the 21st century, in which Holocaust memory and the fight against anti-Semitism, two inherently very important issues in their own right, in my views, became central instruments in Israeli advocacy designed to defend Israel policy against international criticism. Three events contributed to this transformation. The first was Second Intifada that erupted in September 2000 and lasted until 2005. The Second Intifada marked the end of the Oslo peace process years. During the Intifada, Israel found itself in a deep crisis. It became increasingly clear that it was not interested in resolving the conflict with the Palestinians through peaceful means and based on self-determination and equality, but preferred to employ violence that was unprecedented until then. Many in the Western world began questioning the very justice of Zionism itself, not just the fate of the occupied territories. These trends were strengthened against the backdrop of development of post-colonial thought, which powerfully penetrated the academia in America and also, to a lesser extent, in Europe. And another factor, the Israeli new historians who exposed what Palestinians had long known, though no one wanted to listen to them, that in 1948 an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians occurred in Israel. These trends reached their diplomatic peak in the UN Conference Against Racism held in Durban in September 2001, which is the second event that I think greatly influenced the transformation in Israeli diplomacy, or hasbara, I'm talking about. At the conference, Israel succeeded, with the help of the United States and other European countries, in blocking harsh resolutions against it. However, in a parallel gathering of human rights organizations held under the umbrella of the UN conference, in which the most respected organization in the world participated, such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, Israel was accused with great severity of apartheid, racism, genocidal acts, and it's one of the main focuses of the concluding reports of this conference. The conference marked the beginning. This conference, the Durban 2001 conference, marked the beginning of a turning point in world public opinion, at least the progressive part of it. The third event that influenced this the trend I'm talking about occurred a few days after, and it's a counter event of the conference. The conference was closed in September, the beginning of September 2001, and I refer to 9/11 attacks, which turned the war on terror declared by President Bush into the central component of international politics and helped to mark the Palestinians and their supporters as terrorists and anti-Semitic or anti-West. Hence, Israel reached a point in the early 2000s where it could not justify its policy towards the Palestinians within any liberal discourse, while taking advantage of the global Islamophobic and anti-Arab war on terror atmosphere. Israel transformed the war against anti-Semitism and Holocaust memory into its diplomatic shield. Now, one of the ultimate expressions of these processes was the formulation of the definition of anti-Semitism, also which started in the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, which later, and here we get to our topic, in 2016 became the IHRA Definition of Antisemitism, one of the principal instruments for silencing any criticism of Israel and Zionism. The IHRA definition has become now part and parcel of the global right-wing agenda, and it is, or I would say, main center and right-wing agenda, and it served, for example, as part of today, it serves as part of US President Donald Trump's toolkit to dismantle the institution of the universities in America. So let's go now. The second part is looking a little bit closer at the definition itself. Now, I must say that there is something very irritating, even humiliating, and frustrating about speaking on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and I assume that most of you or all of you know what I'm talking about. I mean, after all, it is so clear to me that this is such a distorted definition that does not help us in any way to identify and find anti-Semitism, whose entire purpose is to defend Zionism and political movement, and this, as a political movement and the state of Israel and its violent policies, now genocidal, which have become I think the words of the Israeli philosopher Adi Ophir aptly called are very much to the point, and he called it a discursive iron dome, because it is simply a mechanism to intercept any substantive criticism of Israel and Zionism. This is as clear as day. So it's tiresome to try to prove what is simply self-evident. It's like fighting climate change deniers or those who claim it's nighttime when we can look out of the window and see it's daytime. So we repeat the same arguments over and over again, which is, as Christina just said, I mean, you see with your own eyes, and they are so powerful to just deny what we see with our own eyes. Okay, nonetheless, I will briefly present this part of the definition and its main problematic clauses. Now I'll share again. The IHRA organization itself is an influential international organization established in 1998, comprising today, it doesn't start like that, 35 member states, primarily from the global north, including Israel and East Europe. The organization adopted a working definition of anti-Semitism in 2016 that includes a vague and convoluted core definition of anti-Semitism. I will not even read it. You can read it for yourself and see how it actually doesn't say anything. And instead of, there are so many very good, simple definitions, but they somehow convoluted it so much. Okay, since it is practically impossible to understand anything from this strange definition, 11 examples were added to explain it and actually expose what it really is about. 7 of these examples deal with Israel, meaning that the definition identifies anti-Semitism today primarily with Israel and not with hostility, discrimination, violence, prejudice, or anything else against Jews around the world. 3 examples from the definition are particularly catastrophic in restricting free speech and actually the support of the Palestinian cause. And they are all, and I will show it and I want to stress it, they are all projective in the sense that they project what Israel is doing to the Palestinians while prohibiting talking about these aspects through projecting it on the Palestinians themselves. Now, the first clause that I would is denying the Jewish people, one of the examples, I said the 11, denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, e.g., by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. This means that opposition to Zionism is necessarily anti-Semitic. This is precisely how, for example, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Trump and Jared Kushner publicly tagged it. The logic underlying this claim is completely distorted. Why is it anti-Semitic to deny the Jews the right for self-determination? Because this is right, is a universal right, and the Jews, if you deny this from the Jews, it's a kind of anti-racism against the Jews, and that is anti-Semitic. But really, how can Israel claim such a thing when it itself denies the right of self-determination from another people, the Palestinians, who of course have no document protecting the proper way in which one should talk about the Palestine. So it's not universal, and it's so hypocritical. And the claim that any country is racist is made so often by protesters all over the world, in Germany, in the United States, particularly in settler colonial states like Israel itself. And indeed, this example is usually used in order to designate anti-Semitic any hint that Israel is even partially a settler colonial state, because then it's racist. You can say that because, and as I said, it's not universal. It's something very special. So why is it anti-Semitic? Moreover, there's quite a few Jews, including myself, who see the realization of their Jewish identity precisely in criticizing the racist and violent, now genocidal regime that Israel has created, who strive to change it fundamentally for the sake of better futures for Jews and Palestinians alike. Is it the role of Germany or any other institution to decide that this my Jewish identity, it's a core part of my Jewish identity, anti-Semitic and illegitimate? Is this what it seems that deciding for me how I should be a Jew and how I should practice this Judaism is itself borders anti-Semitism? The second example, drawing comparison to contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Here too, projection is evident. Like you project on the Palestinians and their supporter what you actually do yourself, and then call it anti-Semitism. As Israel and its supporters continuously link Arabs and especially Palestinians to Nazis. This is a deeply rooted, very popular discourse in Israel, and it runs from David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, who saw the Arabs who fought in Israel, fought Israel as the successor of the Nazis, and Benjamin Netanyahu, and to the finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, who recently asserted that there are 2 million Nazis in the occupied West Bank. Not to say that it is the most, I think, common political metaphor in world politics. So everybody is permitted to use this metaphor, except for the Palestinian and their supporter. Then it becomes anti-Semitic, while Israel uses it all the time, internally and externally. In light of these hypocrisies, the IHRA definition asserts that applying double standards by requiring of it behavior, not Israel, not behavior to demand of any other democratic nation, is yet another example of projection. The IHRA definition itself, as we just showed, is a double standard. There's a complete double standard against the Palestinians in his rhetoric of anti-Semitism. And they project it back to the Palestinian and their supporters, and therefore everything could be, and this is really the most effective clause, because everything could be a double standard, because it's completely unfounded. Since is there any international standard for criticism of states? How can we measure whether the criticism leveled in the United States during the Vietnam War, or against France during the Algerian War, or South Africa, or any other state is more or less than what we criticize Israel? Moreover, the nature of political action is always to focus on one issue and not on other. This nature, according to the IHRA definition, the nature of political protest, exposes anyone to who devotes their energy to the struggle of Palestinian rights while criticizing Israel to be charged as anti-Semitic, because one can always say, why do you criticize Israel and not X, Y, Z? They are just as bad. But this is the nature of political, as I said, of political protests. The definition thus enables the interception of almost any criticism of Israel or Zionism, regardless of facts, reality, history, context, by labeling anti-Semitic. It's a very formal logic. It effectively renders the Palestinian narrative anti-Semitic, because is according to this narrative, which is, I think, much more, it's a more truthful narrative, Israel is a settler colonial state, and is racist in its very, as a Jewish ethnic religious state. But we can debate it, but to begin with, that this is anti-Semitic, and the supporters are anti-Semites. And the consequences are, of course, devastating. I assume everyone is familiar with them in Germany. However, now I want to move to my third part and try to suggest what I see as the deep logic of this fight against anti-Semitism as it unfolds, and it is supported by the IHRA definition. It seems that the fight against anti-Semitism in Germany contains two dominant discursive tendencies. One is very formal, pseudo-scientific, and ostensibly rational, and it is obsessive about definitions. After all, if we define something in order orderly manner and then rationally examine the fit of how suitable it is each case to the definition, then we are on solid rational ground. This creates the appearance of objective, impartial analysis. Now I will give example of this type of logic and how it operates ad absurdum in Germany. Now the organization, and I put the organization responsible for this type of discourse is RIAS, the Center of Research and Information about Antisemitism, the main body that monitors anti-Semitism cases in Germany, both for the federal government and for the lender. It is a body that is also very connected to the media, which regularly quotes it regarding anti-Semitism, and this body relies overwhelmingly on the IHRA definition in monitoring and suggesting monitoring anti-Semitism and suggesting policies. About a year ago, an excellent report, which was conducted before the war and the genocide, but was published afterwards, written by the journalist Itai Mashiach and published by Diaspora Alliance in Germany about RIA's distorted work. And I put the link in the chat. There's an English version and a German version and the English version. For example, among other things, RIAS determined that any mention of the so-called, as they say, right of return or so-called Palestinian refugee seems to be anti-Semitic. Other Palestinian national symbols fall also in this category. For RIAS, such a like, for example, a protest featuring historical maps showing the shrinking of Palestine held territories from 1947 to now. For RIAS, such a description intentionally distorts reality and creates the impression that Israel continues to expand. Therefore, I mean, it's unbelievable. Therefore, Israel is to blame, which means it is illegitimate and a colonial state. So you see the logic, the formalistic logic, taking it to its consequence and framing, which this framing as a colonial state amounts to anti-Semitism according to the IHRA definition. One of the cases that RIAS counts as anti-Semitic takes this further logic to the point of even further absurdity. One of the anti-Semitic cases of the 2020 report described as follows, and I put here the German, the German, and I will read it quickly in English. It talks about the official commemoration ceremony in Saxony-Anhalt State's Parliament on precisely today, Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2020, and a speaker, anonymous, suggested equating Israel policy towards the Palestinian with the anti-Semitic policies of National Socialism. Okay, according to the definition, it is really anti-Semitic. The person whose name and identity are not mentioned, nor the content of these words, is none other than Professor Moshe Zimmerman from the Hebrew University, who wrote one of the most authoritative studies on Wilhelm Marr, the patriarch of anti-Semitism, as he called him, who spent his entire life dealing with the history of German Jews and wrote a book about the Holocaust of German Jews. Zimmerman's lecture to the German parliament that day examined the 200 years of what he termed the twisted road to Auschwitz, and it aimed to show that it is the early moments of looming atrocities, those moments that are hard to discern in real time because developments are too slow and their assumptions are too gradual. Now we see how they are escalating. That should really alarm us. Never again Auschwitz, here he said, and really I quoted this from the report. This is too obvious, Zimmerman said. It is rather the continued modest beginning that could eventually lead to Auschwitz that deserved the warning, never again. He further emphasized in his speech being about ubiquitous human behavior and universal history, applied, he said, to the entire world, and he also said, including Israelis, and in their case, not only from a victor perspective. Okay. Here we can see the formal logic operates in full force in the RIAS, naming it as anti-Semitic. since the IHRA definition indeed states, drawing comparison to contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis is anti-Semitic. Zimmerman indeed argued that one should pay attention to the possibility that Israel is marching back then on the path that led to the Nazi regime and to atrocities. What is the logic that enables this absurd and obscene, purely formalistic interpretation? I would like to suggest an answer, and that to draw it to a completely different realm of knowledge. And I will take another example. In January 2022, the Palestinian artist Yazan Khalili of the collective The Question of Funding, which was invited to present in Kassel 15th Documenta exhibition, was accused, and you remember the whole scandal, was accused even before of anti-Semitism by the Alliance Against Anti-Semitism in Kassel. The accusation were based on relating Khalil Sakakini to the accusation were primarily based on the association of the artist Yazin Khalili with the Khalil Sakakini. How? Because he served in a cultural center called Khalil Sakakini Cultural Center in Ramallah as a director for 4 years. Now, while Khalil Sakakini, who died in 1953, before Yazan Khalili was even born, he was tagged as a Nazi sympathizer, and that was enough because the artist worked in a cultural community center on his name, that was enough to tag him as anti-Semite. The allegations were quickly picked up by the major German outlets like Die Zeit and the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And the debate took for months. The claim here is truly very absurd. The artist Yazin Khalili is accused of anti-Semitism because he worked at a cultural center named after a person who died in 1953, long before he was even born. And who is this terrible Khalil Sakakini Nazi, who's Nazi sympathizer, whose very name triggered this allegation? Sakakini was a great humanist Palestinian intellectual who lived in Katamon neighborhood in Jerusalem, not far from where I am. He was an educator and reformer of Palestinian education and a strong, proud Palestinian national consciousness. He had a lot of Jewish friends, students, and Zionist friends, one of whom he even saved from death sentence by the Turks in World War I, risking his own life. Now, he kept a diary in which he was very critical of Hitler and Nazism, but in several lines, he hoped for Rommel victory over Montgomery in order to liberate Arabs in North Africa and in Palestine from the British colonialism. As I said, he was very critical of Hitler and Nazism, but he himself led in the Nakba in April 1948 and he's never permitted to come back, of course. His great library, he had a huge library, which he has a very poetic entry in his diary about, was looted and is today held in the Israel National Library. I think that the fact that the accusation of Khalili as anti-Semitic is so absurd and unsustained is really an indication of something else which is going on. And I think this is the second logic and discourse I want to focus about. It's not about anti-Semitism, of course, but it's not a rational discourse. What is actually revealed here is the logic of contamination related to the conceptual world of purity and impurity. And this is the discourse and logic that we have to pursue. And I will just hint. The logic of contamination follows certain patterns. Impurity spreads through contact, as we saw in the recent examples, sometimes even indirect contact. Touch a corpse, you become an impure. Touch someone who touched the corpse, potentially become impure yourself. And this is precisely the logic that stimulated the case we just mentioned. Another component of this logic is asymmetry. A small amount of impure can contaminate a large amount of the pure, but not vice versa. Vice versa. One drop of sewage ruins a gallon of clean water. One drop of clean water does not purify the sewage. We saw this logic in the Documenta exhibition itself, when one of the two or three icons in giant paintings that could have been interpreted as anti-Semitic contaminated not only the painting themselves and not only the group that presented them, but the entire exhibition, as you all know. Once contaminated, purification often requires specific ritual actions, not just physical cleaning, and sometimes even sacrifices or other prescribed procedures. These rituals, and I finish in 2 minutes, in Germany usually include the sacrifice of alleged anti-Semites by firing them from work or canceling them in the public sphere, or by crucifying them in the media, particularly the Springer Press. Social functions of the purity system are several. They mark social boundaries, who can eat with, or marry, or touch, or become a way of maintaining group identity. It's about symbolic group identity. It also creates social hierarchies. Certain groups may be designated as more or less pure. In the case of Germany, these are the immigrants, Muslim, Arabs, and Palestinians, but also leftists, even if they are Jews, or primarily when they are Jews. Generally speaking, the rules of purity express cosmological order in the sense that they reflect the culture's fundamental categories about how reality is organized. It has nothing to do, I think, with real anti-Semitism. I think these categories of purity, danger, quoting Mary Douglas' famous book, and contamination are the ones with which we have to address the IHRA definition and so-called fight against anti-Semitism, certainly in Germany. It has nothing to do with the real fight against anti-Semitism. Thank you very much. So now questions, or we can skip it.
Yes, thank you very much, Amos, for this great insight. I think Professor Goldman has a question.
Sorry, I wanted to applaud.
Okay, yeah, that's well deserved. True.
But if there is the possibility of asking you something, so I think you really, Amos, I'm very grateful to you for debunking the purpose of the anti-Semitism definition and the operation that it does in our and the work that it does in suppressing dissent. So to me, the question is a little bit, how should we react? Because very often, I, as a lawyer, I'm confronted with allegations of anti-Semitism. I do a lot of advice for colleagues. Actually, I can switch on my camera. For colleagues who are, who get cancelled, and there could be German colleagues, that could be colleagues from abroad, especially also Germans with a migrant background. Very often they get cancelled on, or their panels get cancelled on allegations of anti-Semitism. So how should we confront it? I mean, there is this strategy of coming up with alternative definitions of anti-Semitism, like the Jerusalem Declaration. Is that a good strategy, or aren't we just going down the same rabbit hole by replacing one evil with another, but not contesting the entire definitional exercise? So, not sure if that makes sense, that question.
Yes, I wish I would know the answer. I mean, I think I will answer along the lines that Christina, we are so few, and we are overpowered by such big forces that we don't know how to actually deal with them. Nonetheless, we have an obligation to continue. And now there is, I was among the ones who articulated the JDA. I mean, we initiated it, and we were very much aware that this obsession with definition is part of the problem. Not only with, I mean, the law is clearly. I mean, there's enough. There's enough in the law to confront anti-Semitism along other forms of racism, hate speech and against racism. You don't need a special definition. But since, and I hinted to some processes, and particularly in Germany, I don't know why they are so much obsessed with these definitions. I mean, now Italy is about to insert it into the law. This is like in the law. I mean, this is now is debated today in the Italian parliament. So, we initiated an alternative definition, and we were very much aware that definitions are not the solution, are part of the problem. And not only that these are kinds of definitions that are, again, reproduce the power structure that I would say, like, Jews and Europeans decide for the Palestinians and their supporters how to talk about Palestine. So we were very much aware of this. Nonetheless, at that time, we thought that since anti-Semitism has become a building, and Holocaust memory the fight against anti-Semitism has become a fundamental block of European and Western political world and cultural and historical. You cannot debunk that. And we have to play within this game where there is special status for and I think practically we were right. Now, it didn't change the world, but today there are more than 400 academics supporting it on the website, and on local level, in some of the court cases and some of the universities, the Linke adopted it. It gives tools to fight back, to show that there is a big. I mean, it's a document supported by the most authoritative voices in the field, and with a lot of. It's an expert opinion because it is not. It is the signatories are only from related fields. You don't find a professor of astrophysics, for example, only in somehow related to the field, and it does do the work, and it raises awareness to a substantial alternative way of thought. It is also based on completely different assumptions of equality, of international law, of international human rights, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't. I mean, does it? No, I don't know. I mean, it's weak, but I think it's the less weaker tool that we have today in our toolbox.
Thank you. Aurelia, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind that a law should have been voted yesterday in France, also adopting or embodying in the very law the IHRA definition in France. It was postponed now, and it will go through an accelerated process. We were many to fight it and to write against it. And what I observe is simply that you can have all the texts, the petitions, the open letters, everything you want from the greatest specialists. It doesn't work against this machine, this political machine. And this is what is really frightening. I mean, it's an anti-intellectual machine working through parallel pseudo-scholarly organizations. So in France, you have the IHRA, Réseau de Recherche contre l'Antisémitisme. And they invite sometimes very good scholars on other genocides, for example, who often don't know how they are getting instrumentalized. But I mean, overall, it's really a functioning of parallel organizations like we see here with Tikva, Werteinitiative, Netzwerk Jüdischer Hochschullehrende, and they are anti-intellectual, anti-scholarly. So I don't know I don't find the solution how to fight them. It's really very difficult.
Can I respond for a second? because as I try to say, it's not about anti-Semitism, and it's not about fight its rationality. It's about a deep forms and mechanism of identity and symbolic world in Germany, but not only in Germany. As I said, to organize the society along some, I would say, racist values, to create hierarchies. It's a very useful tool today in creating the so-called Judeo-Christian world against immigrants, Muslims, and it's a very powerful tool not to fight anti-Semitism. It's a very powerful tool, and this is why I said it has the flavor. I mean, this is why I focused on contamination, because contamination is the most unrational. Why is someone anti-Semitic if, and this is an extreme case, why one is anti-Semitic because he worked in a working place on the name of someone who died way before he was even born, was not a Nazi, but had a drop of support for Rommel at a certain historical point in his diary, in his 8-volume diary. So how can this possibly contaminate someone 70 or 80 years later? And it's because it's not about, and this is an extreme case, I think, that exemplified what is it really about. And therefore, and this is why I said I'm sick and tired of confronting it rationally, because it's not about rationalism. It's not, as you said, and as Christina before said, they force us to deny what we see in front of our eyes. And this logic, it's a completely different logic. And maybe this is, now I don't know how, again, if I go back to Professor Goldman's question, I don't know how to confront it, but I'm sure it is really not about anti-Semitism, and it is not about, and it's not about rational discourse, though it pretends to be in this formalistic capacity to be. It's just a charade. Behind this, there is something completely different.
Yeah, I just react. I think it's just exactly the same as you said, like the climate change denial. I mean, it's exactly the same logics that you have a denial of facts that can't be countered with even with forensics. I mean, even the forensic logics has its limits, because it's a denial that is much stronger and works otherwise than just through proof or through lay bare the facts. So, yeah, we don't have an answer for now. I know.
So then I'm gonna no, first answer or react.
No, I said I think my time's up.
Yes, thank you very much for the interesting discussion. Just a quick side note on the legal aspect of it. In Germany here, this definition, IHRA definition, has gotten a special aspect, becoming a kind of soft law with the BDS resolution of the Bundestag, the German Parliament. And last year, there was one of the most important decisions of the Federal Administrative Courts, which had to decide if individual people can fight this resolution via the administrative courts, which is way easier than via the constitutional courts. And it decided, it's kind of deep legalistic argument, but it decided that the constitutional courts are actually competent to discuss this question. And this is very hard to attain legal recourse against constitutional decisions via the constitutional courts. So you can, in theory, fight this parliamentary resolution, but in practice, you can't. And this is kind of one aspect of German legal suppression, that in theory, you have all the competence and rights to fight arms exports, but in reality, you won't even get to the objective decision on it. Yeah, we would.
I will
Please.
just respond. The way it is, the way it was, the IHRA definition, the way it was adopted by the Germans, it's slightly different from the IHRA definition because it took out the only one caveat that this that it is like at the beginning, the preamble of the definition says something like criticism that is leveled like in any other state is not should not be anti-Semitism. This was taken out of the definition as it was adopted by the Germans. So this only very weak caveat in that that has no any effect in practice in the definition as it was articulated in 2016 was taken out by the Germans. So we see now in America that you can be very authoritative allegedly within the Constitution boundaries.